going to start out with a little attention grabber here for you. You might recognize one of these people.
This is Chris.
Hi, Chris. This is Randy Romas from Fiserv User Support. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm working with Kevin to resolve some update issues. Can you spare like 2 or 3 minutes?
Okay.
Great. We were doing some maintenance on the core system last night. We had an issue bringing a new enhancement service up, and so there's a couple of workstations that we need to manually update. Yours was one of those. If you've got about 2 minutes, I'm going to ask you to go visit a Microsoft site so we can get the update in place so that we can try to re-push the enhancement service tonight.
Okay.
Okay? So what I'm going to ask you to do here is open up a browser, an internet browser.
Okay.
Okay. You know where the address bar is there at the top where you can type in an address?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask you to type in the following address. It's https:// and it's the slashes on the question mark.
Oh.
And,
Okay.
and then it's microsoft.issgs.net.
Don't do this.
I don't type as fast as you. Microsoft dot.
Seriously, don't do this.
ISSGS.
Or we'll start your audit now and we'll sign an engagement letter later.
Sam.
Yep, .net. So it would be Indigo, Sam, George, Sam.net.
Okay.
Got that?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Now, when you do that, the next thing I'm going to ask you to do, you're going to go ahead and hit enter,
Hit enter.
and that'll take you to the Microsoft page.
Look legitimate?
Let me know when you get that up.
Anybody from Microsoft here that's going to talk to me later?
Okay.
And then you should see about halfway down a download button, a gray button kind of within a blue bar.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and click download, and you're going to get a pop-up asking you to run, save, or cancel.
What do we do here? We just
Yep.
we
See
run
that?
it, right?
Hit run, and
Always
you
hit
should get
run.
one more of those. And then you hit run again.
What do we do when we get this one?
Okay. Run.
Oh yeah,
And
we
then
got to
there should
hit.
have been a quick
I need
black
to help
screen
here.
that flashed, and then you should have another security information that says yes, no, or more info.
Oh, I got a flash, but that was. Now I got Microsoft. Thank you for downloading.
Yep, there it's done. That's all we needed. So now we can. I got a couple more of these calls to make, but we'll be able to push that enhancement for you. And then Kevin will be coming out with some updated information on what those are in a couple of days.
Alrighty.
Excellent. Thanks for your help.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
2 minutes, 45 seconds, at the end of which the hacker has full access to her PC through the firewall as if they're sitting at her PC. 2 minutes, 45 seconds. That's got to be the most complex Russian hacker magic you've ever seen, right? No, it's a simple phone call with a little bit of technical know-how in the background. So what I'm going to talk about today is cyber fraud. All those, and I'll show you, we'll come back to this webpage. All the links except the download button go to the right place. It takes 30 seconds to copy a website, set up a fake website. So what are we going to do today? I got my, let's see here. I got a clicker here somewhere. Shameless marketing slide that our marketing group makes us put in. Okay, so we've done that. Big accounting firm. We've been doing security assessment work for credit unions for over 15 years. From an independent perspective. So we don't sell hardware, we don't sell software, we don't do monitoring services, we don't do implementations. Purely an advisory role. What we're going to talk about today, some of the emerging trends in cyber fraud. Anybody read the Association of Fraud Examiners report that comes out every other year? Two of you. Well, that's not the kind of fraud we're going to talk about. That's insider fraud. This is external fraud from the hackers. I'm going to talk about 3 industry security reports, and then I'm going to weave in a whole bunch of stories of case studies, either things we've seen in audits, things we've helped clients investigate, or items from the news. What do these groups all have in common? And this is interactive, so if you guys don't answer, I'm going to start walking in amongst the crowd. I'm going to stand next to you and make you really uncomfortable. They all have people or users. Yep, that's one. They all have computers. That's another. They're what? They have IT shops. None of them as good as you guys. They all accept or make payments. And then the last piece you probably don't know, every one of those is somebody we've had the good fortune to help through a payment fraud scenario since last October. Every single one of them. They all have an interaction with a bank or a credit union where they are sending or receiving payments, and that process has been compromised. So what's going on here? Why do we care about this stuff? Organized crime is heavily involved. When we started doing this 15 years ago, it would be one thing to do our hacking and break into a credit union. But then say, well, what do you do with that? Yeah, you're really smart, you broke in, so what? The bad guys back then, they didn't know how the payment process worked. They didn't know how the credit union or on the bank side, how the core systems worked and how to move money. You sit down at an InfraGard meeting now, you talk to the FBI agents, they'll tell you the Russian mob, they're investing money in figuring out how the process works, how the applications work, and how to move money. And so what we've arrived at is a situation where organized crime is highly involved. There's a wholesale to retail distribution chain. At the end, if I got time, I'll take you out to a Hacker Carder forum. It's a website set up to sell stolen credit card information. Somebody breaks in and steals it. They distribute it to other groups who carve it up and say, this stuff I'm going to use for fake cards, this stuff I'm going to use for online fraud, this stuff I'm going to use for something else. So they're going after the payment channels. We have ACH, wire transfers, credit card fraud. The hackers continue to focus on our weakest link. Our weakest link is the end users. All the big security companies do studies now. They do studies, they produce results. My certifications say I can't spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But on the other side, we say it's not paranoia if it's true. So Norton did this study, and the gist of it is the cyber fraud, not the internal fraud, the cyber fraud side of this is more lucrative than the global drug trade now. Hundreds of millions of dollars every year are being stolen. The bad guys are going after the easy money. The credit union's not that easy to break into. A well-configured firewall is virtually impossible to break. Everybody lets two things in and out of their firewall. What are they? Email and browsing. That's the channel the bad guys are going after. They're attacking the members and the end users. Ponemon Institute. Anybody heard of the Ponemon Institute? More of a boutique security firm. They do a couple studies every year. One of them is related, and it's a longitudinal study, so they look at it every year. They look at what does it cost for a data breach, and they look at all kinds of information, hard dollars out, soft dollars, people's time. Until last year, every year that dollar amount went up. 2 years ago, it was $214 per record breached. Last year, it actually went down to $194. Now, I'm not an accountant, even though I work for an accounting firm. I'll pretend to be an accountant. Easy math here. We helped a client through a breach earlier in the year. Somebody thought it was a good idea to take the backup tapes, put them in their car, and drive them to the backup site every day as part of the process. Needless to say, somebody broke in and stole the backup tapes out of the car. All of the member information was on the tapes. What's the immediate next question we have to ask? Were they encrypted? What's the answer? What's the right answer? What's it supposed to be? What was the real answer? No. 20,000 sets of records exposed. Now, I'm not an accountant, but I can do that math. 20,000 sets of records times $200 a record, that's a big number. Over the life of that breach and the response, it could potentially cost them up to $4 million. Paying for identity theft monitoring, hiring the law firm and the forensic firm to figure out what's going on and what we do, the PR firm to craft the message, replacing cards, changing processes, costs a lot. The other study that I pulled up recently, they do one now that's called Banking Trust. They do a report on banking trust, and the gist of this one, and the links to these are later in the report. The gist of this one is, regardless of how the cyber fraud occurs with your members, regardless of who's really at fault, they are going to expect you to make them whole. They are going to expect you to be the responsible party, regardless of how the event occurred. Somebody gets hacked, they get phished, their credentials get stolen, the bad guys log into the credit union with the right credentials the first time and they steal money, the member's going to expect you to take care of it. Not my fault. That's the gist of this report. They find that the end user, the business, the member, the consumer, they are not keeping up with the security controls and the technology, and they don't want to. They expect us to take care of this. So talk about these three reports. One is from SANS, one is from TrustWave, and one is from Verizon. SANS was a one-time report back in late 2009. TrustWave and Verizon come out with these reports every year. And so there's some good information to pull out of this. I think the SANS report is still highly on point, mainly because of what we see in the other reports. So SANS, independent organization, security awareness, training, and certification. They don't sell hardware, software, products. Back in 2009, they did a year-long study with about 10,000 organizations around the world. And the essence was to figure out what are the bad guys trying to do? How are they trying to break in? So they put network taps and monitoring. They gather data from all these organizations. They analyze it and process it. It's really a pretty brief report. And what they found was they distilled it down to two key areas, client-side attacks and vulnerable websites. Well, what are client-side attacks? That's where we don't go after the firewall, the email server, the web server. We go after the end user and their workstation. How many of you read a PDF document in the last 2 weeks? How many of you opened an Excel file? How many of you synced your iTunes on your phone? Okay? Those are client applications that we use every day, all day long. So I, as a bad guy, I've discovered a software vulnerability in Adobe. Not only that, I figured out how to craft my malware to embed it in an Adobe document. And then I shotgun out 10 million email messages with it attached, hoping that 5% of those are actually real addresses. They auto-create these things. So 10 million out, 5% real addresses. 5% of those get a live set of eyeballs that do what I ask, open the attachment. And then my malware in the document checks the workstation to see is it patched or does it have this vulnerability and can we take it over? Client-side attacks, going after the weakest link. Everybody, most of you guys are in technology, you know, the Java vulnerability was the big one earlier in the year. We're still fighting that battle. The other thing that they came up with, decided, was vulnerable websites. You all have websites. Most of you've really got kind of two categories. You've got the one that says, here's who we are, here's what we do, here's our services, here's how to reach us. And then there's a login button to our home banking, our e-commerce, where the members log in. What can I do to either one of those if I know the administrator password? Okay, I got to come out here and stand next to somebody. What can I do if I know the administrator password? I could redirect. There's a more general answer. Anything I want, right? If I can get the administrator password, I can do anything I want. So I could redirect. I could change the code behind that login button so it goes to the lookalike. The member logs in, hits submit, gets redirected to another login page. Oh, I must have fat-fingered my password. I'll log in again. In the meanwhile, we've acquired the password. Or I could subtly change one of the images so that when people browse to the website, their machine downloads my malware in that image and it tries to take over their workstation. So we're back to attacking the end user. The other thing they talked about was attacking the input fields. So any place where we have to put in information and hit submit, that's going to a back-end database that's getting processed. And if we don't follow secure coding practices, we've figured out we can push gobbledygook, that's the technical term, gobbledygook, through to the database to try and get the database to hiccup. It's called a SQL injection. So if a SQL injection exists because we're not sanitizing the input, we can try to run commands in the underlying operating system or the database and take it over. If we can execute a SQL injection, we can usually read the contents of the database tables and fields at a minimum. And if the system hasn't been hardened, then the SQL database can usually run commands in the operating system as system, which is actually a higher level of privilege than an administrator. So if the SQL injection exists and the hardening hasn't properly occurred, we can usually take over the underlying operating system without knowing any passwords. And usually in those instances, it's kind of game over inside of about 30 minutes to an hour. So take a step back. SANS came back with two things: client-side attacks. Anybody get the Nigerian email scam this month? Why does it still go around? Let me ask a different question. Who bought a Powerball last week, hoping you'd win the $400 million? Why do you buy a Powerball? We want free money, right? Why does the Nigerian email scam work? Because somebody's still falling for it. You know, I haven't got my $20 million, but you know, maybe the next one they'll actually send it. And attacking those websites. Most of the websites attacks are to get back to the client-side vulnerabilities. So that's SANS. TrustWave and Verizon are a little bit different. TrustWave and Verizon do breach analysis. What actually occurred? What was the root cause that let the bad guys get in? Those reports are thick, so if you need something to put you to sleep, go print one of those out and read it just before you go to bed. I've got some data here from 12 and 13, and I've distilled down to about 3 or 4 slides because it's the basic stuff. In 2012, they said 80% of the breaches had a root cause related to remote access, client-side attacks, and default credentials. Now this is a sarcastic question. How many of you can work when you're not in the office? Everybody, right? We got VPN, we got webmail, we got remote desktop. How many of you, no slamming vendors, I'm a vendor, how many of you have an IT vendor that provides remote support of something? Everybody raise your hand, because I know you all do. Okay, how do they do that? Do they show up every week and come fix your stuff? No, they've got remote access. 80% of these breaches, remote access, weak credentials, client-side attacks. Once the bad guys get inside, they got to go find the data, because it's usually not in the system they get remote access to initially, so they got to root around on the inside. 80% of the inside attack activity is weak administrator credentials and weak administrative shares. Once we can get to the inside, it's kind of like a turtle. We got a nice hard outer shell. It's kind of soft and mushy on the inside. And the problem is, you may have really good processes. Let's say you got, I work with some credit unions. You got 400 servers and 1,000 workstations. And they're really good and they're really secure. The challenge is, where are the 2 that we missed? And the tools exist to find those pretty quickly. So the challenge here is finding the tools that help us find those missing systems, the exceptions. When you look at the 2013 report, which came out late this spring, the remote access and the SQL injection kind of went up and down by the same amount. So remote access went from 60 down to 47. SQL injection went from 7% up to 26%. The rest of it stayed mostly the same. 80% of the insider activity, once they get in, is weak default administrative credentials. Most of the system compromises are related to third-party supplied systems. I got an example later on. We come in, we audit tons of credit unions. I'm one of those damn auditors. And what we find time and time again is the systems you guys care and feed and build and maintain yourself, they're usually pretty well secured. Why? Because you have emotional ownership of your stuff, but you have access and control of them. So we come in and do an audit and say you should do this, this, and this. Guess what? You do this, this, and this. Over here we got the 10% of systems that the vendor gives us. And we find some holes in that, and we say you got to do this, this, and this. What do you got to do? You go to the vendor and say, we need this, this, and this. What do they say? We'll get it in our next service release in 2015. Okay, sorry vendors, no offense. See that too often. Or, if you make that change, you will void our maintenance contract, and we will no longer support it. We won't warranty it. So part of the story that comes out of this later is too often, we've got pretty high standards. The credit union, the vendors give us systems that are like this. We have to insist that the vendors give us systems that at least live up to our expectations. We have to insist. Now, it's not easy. I'm not telling you it's easy. It's going to be hard. It's going to be an uphill battle. But that's where we got to get to because of what these reports tell us. This is where the weakness is. Last two slides from TrustWave. These are the sky is falling slides. Anybody? Now, the other thing about TrustWave, most of their breach analysis is focused on credit card security. So they talk about data in terms of data at rest and data in transit. Data at rest is credit card data that's actually stored on the system for some period of time. Could be 5 seconds. Usually it's longer because there's a point of sale system of some sort, a terminal out front. There's a back-end server that's doing some processing or storage. The data is stored internally. Data in transit is stuff that's never stored. It's all payment gateways outside, tokenization, no card data inside the environment. The 2012 report said data in transit situations, the bad guys are inside for 110 days before anybody knows it. 110 days that they're sitting there lurking and gathering data. When the data is stored, they're inside for a year and a half before anybody knows it. Think back to the global payments system breach. Anybody from Global Payments before I get myself in a lot of hot water here? And I'm going to get these dates approximately right and approximately wrong. They come out last year in February and said, oh, we had a breach, 10 million records exposed. The breach happened actually came out in March. Had a breach, 10 million records, breach occurred in February. A month later, they come back out and say, we got it wrong. We had a breach. It was 20 million records, and it happened in December. And then, lo and behold, we get to June. They come out again, we got it wrong again. It was 45 million sets of records, and it was a year. I couldn't make it up. It was a year and a half ago. Just after we started using this in our slides. Bad guys are inside for a long time. We're not watching the right stuff. So the new data, it's getting a little bit better. That number's getting smaller. Now we're sitting at about 25% of these breaches where the bad guys are inside for half a year to a year, 14% where they're in for a year to 2 years. So the numbers are getting better, not drastically better, but it's improvement. We gotta watch things a little differently. I talk about Verizon as the silver lining. Verizon is very similar. They have a much larger base because they work much more directly with government law enforcement, FBI, Secret Service, other countries' law enforcement. So they've got a much bigger pool that they're analyzing. 3 things jump out of that report at me. It takes time for the bad guys to break in, to root around on the inside, to find the data they want, and to export the data. It takes time, days, weeks, and months. The log files almost always have evidence of the intrusion attempt, the successful intrusion, the rooting around on the inside and elevating privileges, copying the data, and moving it out. The evidence is there. We're not watching the right stuff, or the systems aren't telling us the right stuff. The last thing, most of these are not highly difficult. What do we mean by that? Well, let's go back here. 80% of the internal activity is guessing, finding default passwords and default administrative shares that are wide open. Most of the attack activity doesn't take high skill or expertise once they get to the inside. How hard is it to change a password? That's a trick question, by the way. It's easy to change a password. It's hard to remember. It's easy to tell a vendor you have to change a default password. It's really hard to convince them why. So it's straightforward. It's not always easy. And you look at the numbers from 12 to 13, there's not a huge change. In 12, the low difficulty was 65%. In 13, it was 68%. So we're kind of in a steady state as this goes. Who's doing it and why? Most of these are attacks of opportunity. Again, back to the Adobe example. They didn't target you. They targeted a situation. They shotgun out the Adobe messages. Or they find a vulnerability in, let's say, IIS, web server. And so they scan the whole internet for IIS servers with that particular vulnerability. And then they go in. The vast majority of these are targets of opportunity. When you look backwards in time, who it is in the latest, 83% is organized crime. The year before it was 54%, and the unknown was the exact percentage correspondingly higher. The year before, it was 23%. So that has drastically ramped up because why? They can make money at it. They've turned it into a business. They're making money. Last thing on the Verizon one, this is from this year's, and the interesting thing here that jumped out at me was the change in social engineering. Social engineering in the preceding years had been relatively low as a root cause that led to this. The other thing, when you look at the Verizon account, again, I'm not an accountant, but I work with them too long. I add up the numbers. That's more than 100%. How's that work? And the gist of it is most of these breaches have more than one key element, which is why they don't add up to 100%. But in 11, social engineering was related in 7% of these. It jumped up to 30% in 2012, which is the 2013 report. So that phone call I played, that's an example of social engineering. That's a pretext phone call. Okay? Apologies to the Fiserv folks in the room. You pick any vendor and put their name in there, and the same process works. If somebody's going to target a social engineering attack, they're going to do their homework and figure out who you use. What are the right phrases or people to mention? So it could be Fiserv, it could be Scimitar, it could be Jack Henry, it could be, you name it, ABC Computer, Comcast. You insert a name that you think is something they will recognize and respond to, and see what happens from there. Questions on the 3 reports before I jump into the next part? Anybody read those? Trustwave does it, Verizon does it, Symantec releases them, Microsoft does them, they all do them. Yes, sir? What do you account for the jump in physical? Good catch. In the Verizon report, they actually call it out. Most of that is related to skimmers on pay-at-the-pump gas stations or replacing the card readers, old outdated card readers at retail locations. That's where most of the jump in the physical comes in. All right, moving on. Email phishing, my favorite topic. I wish I was smarter than I am because we were doing email phishing as part of audits before they coined the term phishing. So I could have maybe patented that and made some money on the side. Didn't work. So phishing, spear phishing, is impersonating somebody of authority to convince the target to do something. The Better Business Bureau one works all the time. We pretend we're somebody in marketing. We send an email to the CEO saying, oh my goodness, somebody's lodged a complaint against us with the Better Business Bureau. Click here, go to the website, read about the complaint and what to do to resolve it. And you know what, any CEOs in the room before I pick on CEOs? I'm an equal opportunity pick on people, so I'll get back to others later. Oh my God, we got to fix this right away. We can't have this. The example I used on the phone, we do it through an email phishing example as well. We pretend Randy's the IT guy. It's Patch Tuesday. The advisories have come out. So we've made a copy of an old, this is an old copy. You guys might recognize some of this. Most places I go, they don't realize the advisories haven't looked like this for years. So the bottom part is the advisory Randy receives. You know, how many of us have IT folks that don't have enough to do? We got to do more with less all the time, right? So the advisory comes in late in the day. Randy needs everybody's help. Quick, I can't get this pushed out fast enough. Or the patch system is broken. Everybody click the link, download, and run the update for me. Couple problems with the email. Some people have seen this before, some haven't. When you all send email to each other inside the credit union, inbox to inbox, it never leaves the email server. Even if you're sitting here on your iPad or your Surface or on your phone, inbox to inbox. The only thing you should see is the alias, the name at the front. Anything in brackets means this came from something else. Anybody got printer multifunction devices at the credit union where you scan the document and emails you the document? That's because the multifunction device has its own email server embedded in it, and it's emailing to you. You get those documents, there's going to be something in brackets. This didn't really come from Randy, the internal IT guy. It came from the outside. Most people don't recognize that. The other thing we're preying on here, adults don't read the characters, they read the patterns. And so we're trusting, hoping, that you see Microsoft, 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 Microsoft. It looks like it came from Randy. We trust Randy. We're just going to click the link. You all know what Microsoft's website is. That's not Microsoft. That's something else. We didn't even try to hide the link here. Sometimes we hide the link. If you put your mouse over it, you'll see where it's really going. A couple telltale signs there. If anybody here is actually asking their users to update or patch something, you're training them to be susceptible to phishing. Stop it. Need to stop it. This came out of the new Verizon report, the inevitability of the click. It only takes about 5 or 6 emails to get our chances of somebody clicking on that link up to about 80%. If they click on the link, they go here. Does this look familiar? Okay, so we can do it by email, do it by phone. Here, if we can get people to this page, our success rate goes from about 40 or 50% to about 90. Because they're curious, because they want to help, because they don't recognize how it really works. Now, we can do 2 things here. Once they get to the website can actively check Internet Explorer to see if it's exploitable. So that's already happening in the background before we even hit the download button. If that doesn't work, they hit the download button, then they're saying, yes, I want to run this. Yes, I want to execute it. No, I don't care what the security problem is. Ponymon did a study a couple years ago looking at, what do people do with pop-ups? And they determined it does not matter what's in the pop-up. They will click the link. Are you sure you really want to download and run this virus? They put that in a pop-up. 80% of the people ignored it and hit yes. This is the only problem here. We can't fake that URL in the user's browser. If they're not paying attention, that's the only telltale sign of what's wrong here, besides the pop-ups that come after this. So I'm going to skip through the next section because it's really focused on the FFIEC authentication guidance. I figured out about 6 weeks ago I got this quote wrong. It's actually somebody else that asked this, but I think, saying it was Jesse James sounds better. Why does he rob the banks? It's where the money is. Today, the money is in ACH and online cash management. They're going where the easy money is. This occurred back in 2011. This is a bank again. Business customer gets phished. Malware gets on the controller, the CFO's PC. Bad guys harvest the credential. Bad guys log into the bank. They wire out $560,000 in 47 transactions in a 3-hour period. They sued the bank saying, bank, your controls failed. Never mind, we got the malware on our PC. Your controls failed. Previous to this event, we'd wired money out twice, ever. Both to banks within 100 miles, both for under $2,000. Now we have 47 transactions all going to Europe and Asia, all for just under what dollar amount? $10,000. In fact, we noticed something was wrong. We called you at the 11th transaction and said, this isn't us, stop it. And they let the rest of the money go out. They didn't stop the rest. They're stating that the bank should have recognized this was drastically out of the norm for their normal activity. You should have recognized and stopped this. This went to court, it went into litigation, they settled. We don't know what they settled for, we know they don't bank there anymore. I've got example after example after example of this. Lots of them. Goes back to the semantic study. The end user expects you to take care of it, you to be responsible, not their fault. Sound familiar? Sound like our kids? So next I usually talk about the updated authentication guidance. Everybody familiar with the FFIEC authentication guidance? How many times has it come out? Anybody know? Nobody knows? 2001, 2005, 2011. Came out in 11, and basically the FFIEC said, you know what? We got a problem. 2005, everybody did their FFIEC authentication guidance risk assessment. Did a good job. Then what did they do with it? You know the answer. Put it in a binder and stuck it on a shelf. and they didn't do it again. Most people didn't do it again. So there's really kind of 4 key elements in my mind of the authentication guidance. One is authentication. One is validation, that the person that's interacting with us is authorized and what they're doing is authorized. One is back-end administration, anomaly detection, control of accounts. And then the last is educating our members. Got to do the risk assessment at least annually or when the situation changes, as described here. Change in member base, change in functionality, actual instances of hacking or fraud. Have to do it. Make it a process, build it into your business and your culture so that when you do a change, you do a risk assessment. It doesn't have to be a 2-week process. You're thinking of a new functionality to your member, spend 2 hours doing a risk assessment, say, here's what we did before, here's how this is changing and impacting, here's what we think is the new situation. Document it, you're done. It doesn't have to be a 2-week process, but you got to do it. Talks about the authentication piece up front. We got to do a better job of authenticating them. We can't rely on simple controls. We did a penetration test a couple years ago for a Fortune 100 company based in Minneapolis. The way we broke in was through the board of directors website. It was on the corporate infrastructure, and the board of directors website had a password self-service reset function. How many of us have a self-service password reset for people? Some of you do, okay? And usually it involves, I forgot my password, so I click here, and then I get a what? A challenge question. Well, the chairman of the board's challenge question was, what's your son's name? Boom. We got his password. We could log into the system. Now we're past the authentication portal. We're into the back end where we can upload and download files and get files. And within about 2 days, we'd found enough things where we could worm our way to the inside. Can't use simple challenge questions anymore. Here's the other one I love. What's your favorite color? Anybody ever seen that challenge question? What's your favorite color? How many guesses do I really need? 3 to 5. Red, blue, and black. That'll get me about 40% of the room right here, whether you admit it or not. Talks about out-of-band or out-of-wallet types of questions, things that we are not going to find on Facebook or LinkedIn. Also talks about, more specifically, out-of-band. So, the idea between out-of-band, you guys know this. I'm doing my home banking on my laptop. I want to log in, username, password. I hit submit. I get a call back. I get a call. I have to push a code, a number. I get a code in a text message. I have to enter it back into the system. The problem with this scenario is, what are we pushing everybody to do now? Bank on this, right? If I'm doing my banking here, and the out of band comes back to here, we're not out of band anymore, are we? If the text message comes to here, I'm not out of band. The whole idea is, if they've compromised one device, we assume they haven't compromised the other. If we do it all here, we're not using 2 different devices or channels. So that's something we got to think about there. This is a big one. It's probably more related to businesses than it is, and natural members. The control over administrative functions. When you look at business banking situations, most businesses, the financial institution gives them a master account for their online cash management. So Joe gets the master account. Joe's the controller. It's up to Joe to set up sub-accounts within the organization. Joe's got 4 people. These 2 can set up, initiate, request wires or ACH payments. These 2 can review and authorize them, and never should the 2 mix. What we found most of the time, in almost every case of these frauds, they're not setting up the sub-accounts or setting up segregation of duties. I did a speech at a bankers conference in the summer, and an examiner went before me. He said he was adamant, in every single case of payment fraud like this, where they stopped it before it went out, there were a human set of eyeballs in that process that recognized something was wrong and stopped it. In almost every single case where they didn't stop it, they were relying entirely on automated processes. And somebody wasn't injecting into that chain to say, wait a minute, something's wrong here, this isn't right. We got a payroll file with 50 entries, and the last 20, and they never change, and the last 25 all changed this time. They talk about monitoring. This is the place I say, you know what, let's push this back to our members. Let's draw them into this equation. ACH positive pay is the idea of setting up a whitelist around the ACH function. Essentially, you have a list of authorized payees. If a payment comes in for them and they're on the list, we're good. For each of the payees, we got a dollar threshold. As long as it comes in as one of the authorized payees and it doesn't exceed the high end of the dollar threshold, it goes out. No additional review or authorization required. If they're not on the list or it exceeds the amount, somebody's got to manually verify it. In every one of these we've seen, either the dollar amount has been exceeded or the entries have been changed. Now, the bad guys are getting smarter. A lot of this is they're going into the ACH payroll files. And most systems support some sort of positive pay at the file level. So if our payroll file every 2 weeks is $600,000, as long as that overall file level doesn't change, it just goes. So the bad guys got smart. They said, okay, I'm going to go into the ACH file. I'm not going to change the first 20 entries because that's what somebody sees when they open. I'm going to go to the bottom, and I'm going to replace all the bottom entries, and the total dollar amount is going to stay the same. So we need to find a way to push that ACH positive pay strategy into the individual entries in the file, because that's where they're changing them now. Last component is the awareness back to the members. The guidance is pretty clear. We have to do a better job of educating our members. We have to do a better job of telling them what our responsibility is at the credit union, what controls we have, how we're safeguarding, and what their responsibilities are, what they need to do. In several places, the guidance strongly encourages that we encourage our members, our business customers, to do their own risk analysis. What I've been telling my clients is go back to those people, and you're probably not going to convince them to do a whole lot different, but what you will probably be able to convince them to do is investigate their cyber liability insurance. Go to your insurance agent, ask them if your cyber liability coverage protects them here. What's the insurance agent going to do? They're going to give them a what? What are they going to give them, Jeff? Questionnaire, right? What's the questionnaire? Questionnaire is the insurance company's risk assessment to figure out where their risk is for that customer or member. So essentially, you can trick that end user into doing a risk assessment because the insurance adjuster isn't going to do anything until they understand what the client's risk is. So a couple of examples. The first one is an association. It's a healthcare association. I speak at some of their events, so I know the CEO. He calls me in December, and he says, we've been hacked. $1 million is gone. I'm suing the bank. They failed. And he's adamant. Controller comes in one day, spam filter failed, hundreds or thousands of spam messages. She clicked on something, malware, credentials. Bad guys log in, they wire out $8,000 to Houston, 30 minutes later, $540 to Romania, 30 minutes later, $540 to Romania. Convinced, what is the transfer to Houston for? It's a test, and it worked. So the CEO is adamant the bank failed. He says, you know what, Randy, when we signed up with this bank years ago, I had to fill out a form for wire transfer. CEO's authorized to wire $50,000. Controller, CFO, authorized to do $15,000. Drastically exceed those limits. Second part, callback verification. Any wire transfer, CEO gets a callback. Adamant. Every time we've ever wired money, got a callback. Adamant, the bank failed. They ended up getting another firm in to do all the investigation because our firm does some of their tax and audit work, and they wanted to make sure there was true independence. He kind of kept me informed. I run into him at the conference in June. He's got a great big smile on his face because I told him, guess what? Make friends with your worst case scenario. Romania, your money's gone. Just kind of get over it. He runs into me in June, big smile, and said, guess what? We caught the bad guys. They actually caught the bad guys, 2 of them in Romania, put them in jail. They got all but $6,000 back. I'm like, well, what really happened? Did the bank really fail? And then I deflated him when I asked that question a little bit. Well, sort of. Roy was right and Roy was wrong. Roy was right about the controls he thought were in place. They were in place for in-person or over-the-phone wire transfer. This occurred through ACH, not the same. Most of us probably realize it. Different payment systems, different processes, different rules. The end users, the members, the customers, they don't care. It all looks the same and does the same to them. The controls he was referencing were still in place for in-person, over-the-phone wire transfers. 6 months previous to this event, they had signed up for the bank's new online cash management. So online payroll, online accounts receivable, online accounts payable, all that stuff. Different process, different set of controls, different contract. They assumed they were the same, they weren't. Big light bulb aha moment for them. So, take away from this, be very explicit what the controls are if you have 2 different systems, even though they look the same, and where you can, make them as similar as possible to try and eliminate some of the confusion. Next example, how am I doing on time? I'm going to skip through this because I don't have a lot of time. Basically, hospital, same deal. This one's a little different. The hospital got fished, $150,000 out the door. They hire law enforcement, any FBI agents in the room before I get in trouble with them again. They call law enforcement, FBI shows up. Guess what FBI does with the 4 PCs in the finance department? Takes them away. See ya. Doesn't tell them anything. Okay, how many of you want the FBI to show up and just take your stuff away? Wouldn't have to come into work tomorrow. Come back 4 weeks later, give them back the 4 PCs. Guess what the FBI tells the hospital? It's a trick question. Nothing. Ongoing investigation. $150,000 is so small, we're just going to hold on to this until we figure out if something else ties into it. So the hospital hires an investigative firm to come in and figure out what happened. The problem is they weren't working with their bank at this point. It's already an adversarial situation. So their investigative firm comes in and looks at their network and the 4 PCs, but they don't have access to the hosted online system where all the activity took place. The investigative firm, not Clifton Larson Allen, the investigative firm gets to the end and their report is worded very interestingly. It says, we did not find any evidence that the credentials left or were stolen from the 4 PCs in question. Therefore, it's the bank's fault. Further in the report, there's evidence of malware and other systems on the inside of the network, but somehow that isn't relevant. Here's the problem. What did the FBI have to do when they seized the PCs and left with them? They had to turn them off. Most of today's modern malware runs in running memory only. It doesn't write anything to the hard drive. As long as the PC's up and running, the malware's there. They might make a registry change to go out and get new malware when you start over, but the malware itself is never written to the hard drive. And so the first thing we did was we questioned the assumption that you had all the right data. We came in and looked at the bank. We worked with the hosting provider. We analyzed all the logs. All of the logins for the fraudulent activity came from the hospital's IP addresses. The bad guys logged in with the right credentials the first time. There were no failed logins. So I'll cut to the chase. Through this whole period, they're telling me if this goes to litigation, the bank tells me this, we're going to lose. I'm like, you're nuts. Everything points back to the hospital. 2 different reports don't agree. We have kind of a closing powwow. Hospital and their investigator, us and the bank. Both sides describe their report. No real disagreements. They actually agree with our challenge of the assumption that you didn't have running memory. And so then it's open floor for the hospital and the bank to ask questions. This hacking event happened on a Friday. They always happen on a Friday. Somebody at the hospital said, okay, help me understand this then. you guys, on the Wednesday before the event, called us, the hospital, and you said, did you guys, the 4 accounts in finance, did you mean to change all your email accounts by 2 characters each? Because we just went in and all your email addresses just changed. People at the bank are like, oh, or at the hospital, no, we didn't do that. We don't know what you're talking about. We didn't change our email addresses. What do we use to log in most of the time? Our email address. What do we use to alert somebody? The email address. Bank says, oh, well, it must be a glitch. Never mind, we'll switch them back. I heard somebody gasp. It gets better. It gets better. The next day, Thursday, hospital's in getting ready to do payroll. They go in and they're like, there's an ACH file here for $40,000 that nobody claims to have created. And the entries are all wrong. So they spend 30 or 40 minutes trying to figure out what's going on. They can't figure it out. The hospital calls the bank. So, total elapsed time, about 45 minutes, an hour, they get somebody from the bank. They say, hey, there was an ACH file in here for $40,000. We didn't do it. What's going on? Well, let me check. They log in. The bank logs in. No ACH file here. We don't see one. We don't know what you're talking about. No ACH file as a draft. No ACH file that actually went out. Don't worry about it. Must be a glitch. I'm sitting here on the phone. I'm like, okay, now I know why they're convinced they're going to lose. What are those 2 events called? Great big red flag. And somebody ignored it. Somebody missed it. Got off the phone here 3 days later. Oh, we settled with the hospital. We're moving on, happy and sure. I guarantee they paid the hospital the entire loss. I don't know that. They wouldn't tell me. 2 great big red flags. I'm going to skip on because I'm about out of time because I got 2 things I want to show you. We've had a couple instances where some credit unions, we're giving ACH functionality to our members now. Dollar limits are relatively low, but we're still seeing cases where they get 10, 20, 30 of your members' accounts and they wire out, ACH out, right to that limit. How do they do it? That's the thing we've struggled with. So what we found, we stumbled on a Carter forum, and it's a place where basically the bad guys who steal the information post it for sale. So here's an example of what some of these accounts are going for. If I can get a Visa Platinum account with the PIN and a good balance, I as a bad guy, I can get $200 an account. So they're making money. Here's a screenshot of the actual web page. So I go to this web page, you got to log in. I can search. I can say, I want to find a credit union in the U.S. with the name of X. And I can find if there are any accounts associated with that credit union that I can buy the accounts from. There's a different button on a fuller page where you can download the whole bin. And so I could download it to a PDF document, and I could literally, you see it says Control F. This is a PDF document. I can search. So if anybody's feeling bold, I can call this up and we can enter your credit union in there and see if there's any accounts out there. Anybody want to do that? Nah, we'll pass on that. There are several, though. And this is updated. This is like a business. They're updating this website every day. New accounts, new information. How do they pay for it? They pay for it through PayPal and Bitcoin. How come nobody shuts these down? They move all over the world. We've tracked this website to hosting providers in Africa, Asia, Europe, South America. They're moving all the time to stay ahead of the law enforcement. Questions on that? This is where the money is. How do they get to it? Email phishing and social engineering. Social engineering is hacking the people. We do social engineering assessments all the time. The vast majority of the time, the client doesn't know what we were able to do until we tell them. You know why? We're not attacking the systems, we're attacking the people. Now, we're all going to Vegas next year, right? Why do we go to Vegas? We like to gamble. Who always wins in Vegas? The house. Why does the house always win? Not because they cheat. They're very explicit. The odds are in their favor. Social engineering works because we set the odds up in our favor. We put people in a position where they have to make a decision. I have to take on 2 minutes of inconvenience to do the right thing, or I can just help. If they won't take on the 2 minutes of inconvenience, our social engineering works. Anybody want to guess how much? Greater than 95% of the time. If they won't take on 2 minutes of inconvenience, the social engineering works. If they will take on the 2 minutes of inconvenience, you will shut it down 98% of the time. 98% of the time. Anybody see Catch Me If You Can with Frank Abagnale? Anybody heard him speak? He's a great speaker. I saw him speak a couple years ago. One of the things that doesn't come out real well in the movie, he figured out you dress like a pilot, you walk and talk like a pilot, and you show up at the airport, guess what happens? Back in the 70s, apparently. They treat you like a pilot, right? The thing that doesn't come out in the movies is he figured out very early on the different airlines would let personnel from other airlines fly. So if he dressed up as a pilot from Pan Am, guess whose counter he did not go to? He did not go to Pan Am because he's afraid they'd recognize him. He went to Delta, or he went to one of the other ones. He figured out the system in the process, and he worked it. Anybody heard of Kevin Mitnick? Poster child for security, social engineering. He was the FBI's most wanted person for 3 years back in the 80s, 90s. The FBI convinced people he could whistle into a phone and make computers do what he wanted to. He was a talented technician. He was a gifted social engineer. So what I played the pretext phone call. You've seen that. I'm going to play a video of us going into a credit union. This happens. There was an event back in 2004, Sumitomo Bank, a huge Japanese bank in London. Bad guys showed up with insider help, went in as the cleaning crew, and they put keystroke loggers on a whole bunch of PCs, mainly the ones related to wire transfer. They came back 2 weeks later, posed as maintenance, and they retrieved the keys. They almost wired out $530 million. They got caught because of a clerical error. They didn't know how to fill out the right check boxes in the SWIFT system. It's the only reason they got caught and stopped. Just in the last week, we've seen a very similar scenario come out. Barclays Bank in London, same deal. Guys are showing up as maintenance people. Instead of keystroke loggers, they're putting in KVM switches tied to a wireless cell modem, burying it in the back, and then they're remoting in through that. So let's take a quick look at this, and then we'll wrap up because I got 2 more slides. Now, to be fully up front, I have very explicit permission to use this. And I gotta So, can I use the name? Just nod your head.
Entrance into Baxter Admin Facility in Vernon Hills. Attempting to go in past the front door.
So let me give you a little context first. We're going to try to put somebody in an uncomfortable position. Not threateningly, we're just going to try to catch them when they're busy. This is Baxter's admin facility, 4-story building, a couple hundred people work there. And essentially it's the end of the lunch hour. So I'm driving around the facility. I'm driving around looking for somebody coming back from lunch, and I'm going to try to get in by convincing them to let me in. What do we call that? You guys have all trained everybody on this. Tailgating or piggybacking, right? So I want to jump up to the right spot because this is about a 45-minute video here. Right about there. So I'm about to pull up to the side because I see somebody pull up and park farther back in the parking lot. So let's watch what happens. About 2 minutes. And there's one place in here where I get tunnel vision and I miss something I could have taken advantage of. So see if you can find this. There's the side entrance. Do you see her in front of me? There's a twist. I'm not going to try to follow her in because we've all been trained about that, right? What's that? What do you hear there? This one. I still have the same card. What am I trying to pretend to be? A frustrated employee, locked out.
Hey, stupid card doesn't work.
Are you somebody new?
Yeah, I'm working with Troy up in IT.
Hi, Jen.
Hi, Jen. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Clearly labeled entrance. Her office is down to the right there, which is also right next to the front door. So I'm inside. I'm going to go look for the facilities director's office. What might the facilities director have that I might want as an intruder? Or a working prox card. Now, I do have a subtle advantage that a attacker might not have. I've been here before, so I know where I'm going. There's his office down at the end. So watch and see if you can, kind of feels like one of those old Batman shows, right? Watch and see if you can tell what I missed. Golden opportunity missed. You notice I pass people in the halls. So I'm just going to end it there. Now, to be fair, there are several of you in this room where we've done this type of audit for. The results are almost always the same. Big, small, sophisticated, not sophisticated. If she had a couple of opportunities to do something different. Are you new? Well, what am I going to say? Yeah, I'm new. I'm the new guy. I'm here to work with Troy. My darn card doesn't work again. Her office is right by the front door. She saw me ahead of her. She'd never seen me before, I know this. She could have offered to help and escorted me to a place where we could call Troy. She could have said, well, let's go to the front desk. I'll hand you off to Roxanne. Roxanne and I are on a first-name basis. Roxanne says, oh, audit or here for an official visit today, Randy? Official visit. She could have avoided the situation, walked to the front, and said to Roxanne, there's somebody I don't recognize trying to get in the side door. All opportunities she could have taken. In other places, you know how we make it seem like we belong even though we don't have a badge? How many of you have a kitchenette somewhere with credit union branded coffee mugs? One of my young guys taught me this. He got in, he went straight for the kitchen, he got the coffee mug with the name on it, and he walked around like this for the rest of the day. I'm one of you. Let's go get some coffee. 2 minutes of inconvenience. If you won't take on 2 minutes of inconvenience, we're on the inside. We can plant keystroke loggers. We can plug in a wireless access point and then go sit outside. We can find PCs that are logged in. They're there. You tell me they're not. I will respectfully tell you you're not telling the truth. Any of you have a clean desk policy? Got into a credit union once that, they sell cars too, right? And we pull up and there's a nice new BMW sitting out front. So guys, go in and find the group that does the cars because the keys are sitting on somebody's desk. So if we can't protect that perimeter with 2 minutes of inconvenience, man, things are going to get ugly really fast. And it happens. It's happening. It's hard to catch. It's hard to tie the initiating attack to the loss. So I'm getting the wrap it up sign. Well, guess what? I'm done. So people, rules, and tools all got to work together. When they work together, we're sitting right in the middle, high security. Things we talked about, payment fraud, social engineering, email phishing. This is how the bad guys are getting in. The evidence is there. We just got to look for the right things. Any questions? The rest of the slides are reference material for all the things I talked about. So links to the news articles, links to the FFIC guidance, links to monitor detection anomaly software. I will be around if you want to chat. If you want to call BS on anything I just said, I'd be happy to discuss. Anything you guys want. Thanks for having me.